Okay, been doing some summer reading recently and came across Andy Martino's book on Brian Cashman and the Yankees, the Yankee Way. Had to have him on the podcast, talk about one of the local teams a lot of the fans here in Connecticut support, and a Connecticut resident, Brian Cashman. So Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jared. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Really excited to talk to you about your book. Really enjoyed it. So I want to start with this one. There's so many different topics to explore when it comes to a franchise like the New York Yankees. How did you come about the idea of focusing your book on Brian Cashman in particular?
That's an interesting question. Well, I've been covering New York baseball for a long time now, more than 15 years, and I knew that Cashman was somebody who had a lot of interesting stories just from getting to know him as someone who I cover and talk to on and off the record. And more broadly than that, I knew that the Yankees had front office continuity, both in personnel and in philosophy, that is unmatched in the
Yeah.
game. So I felt that you could tell the story of the sport itself, the evolution, the trajectory of the sport itself over the past 3, 4 decades through the lens of the Yankees, because they simply have had, as I said, that continuity in place. So it was both his personality and reserve of history and stories and wanting to record that history of the storied franchise, the Yankees, and also wanting to tell that broader story of the game through him.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting parts about this book is you got him to cooperate with you on it. What do you think was the turning point? Because as you've talked about before, he wasn't always open to this, but it seemed like, more recently he did, obviously agreed to do this with you.
Yeah, he might even push back if he were here on the term cooperate, because it was very important to him that this not be perceived, written, or promoted as his project. And that's
Yeah.
fair enough. He's not in a place in his life and career where he wants to do a book like Joe Torre did with Tom
Yeah.
Verducci after he left the Yankees, for example. That's not what this is. And I think that was a big thing for Cashman to a hurdle for him to get over, for me to convince him that that's not what I had in mind. I think the turning point was when I told him, look, I don't want to write your book. I'm actually not interested in ghostwriting your book or what have you. I'm interested in the project that I just described to you, Jared, telling the story of the game, the trajectory of the game, the franchise through him. I said I wanted to do an independent work of reporting, interview all the people that he's worked with, worked against, people who like him, people who don't. And he ended up saying, well, if that's what you're going to do, I don't have the right to tell you to not write a book. And I said, great, you're in. He was never really in, but to his credit, he became a frequent interview subject, and that's all I asked, and he was willing to do that.
One thing that I found really interesting about the trajectory of Cashman's career, as you write about it, from his starting days as an intern, it always seemed like it was just going to be something temporary for him. Maybe he would look to join the corporate world after, spending some time with the Yankees. George Steinbrenner really had to convince him to take the job. What do you
Mhm.
think it was that ultimately has lasted for Cashman in terms of staying in baseball for as long as he has and staying in this role with the Yankees?
Yeah, he had interned or worked part-time at UPS when he was young, so he could have been a longest tenured UPS executive instead of Yankees executive. Why has he stayed? I think that's a very deep and complex answer for him in his life and his career. There is the familial relationship between his father and George Steinbrenner, which goes back to the
Yeah.
two of them worked together in harness racing when Brian Cashman was a child. Uh, the fact that Brian Cashman's father uh, loved the Yankees and wanted Brian to be the GM of the Yankees. There was the fact that George himself became, in a sense, like another father figure to Brian, but a toxic father figure too. There's love, there was hate, there was arguments, but George Steinbrenner knew how to engender loyalty. And when Cashman quit after the 2005 season, and he had an offer to make double the money to be the GM of the Dodgers, he was going to take it. George Steinbrenner called him and said, "Why are you leaving me?" and appealed to his feelings and to his loyalty. And then there's the other aspect of it's the Yankees, and Cashman feels that the Yankees are a special place to succeed in. So there's a lot going on there. And then, of course, in more recent years, he has a more uh, rational and less toxic relationship with Hal Steinbrenner that is easier to be loyal to. So a lot of different factors over why he stayed. Part of it, I think, is after you won the World Series with the Yankees as a young GM. if you went and ran the Angels and won the World Series there, I don't know that it would feel as good. And he's, I know, in a sense, almost addicted to chasing that dream with the Yankees continually.
Yeah, through as you go through the kind of the timeline here of the book throughout his career, leading up to before he even took the job, he saw a number of GMs and managers get cycled through those roles. In terms of what he's offered to this organization, what do you think his sticking power has been that he's been able to last as long as he has in a
Hmm.
franchise that seemed as it was early on, would just cycle through these guys one by one?
Yeah, good question. I'd say a couple things. His toughness, he's got a thick skin. He's not afraid to go at players, even though he's smaller in stature, and he will be very blunt and strong and tough in an alpha environment that requires it. Number one. Number two, he appeals to the Yankees and has value to the Yankees in that he's ideologically flexible. You wouldn't necessarily say, here's Brian Cashman's baseball philosophy in one paragraph. It evolves with the game. When everyone was giving Billy Beane a hard time 20 years ago for Moneyball in the industry, saying, "Oh, you're just a self-promoter. Why did you write this book?" Even though he didn't write the book, but that was the kind of stuff he was hearing with Moneyball. It was Cashman was the one calling him saying, "Hey, this is interesting. What should I read? Who should I hire?" And then when the Statcast era becomes explodes, changing the analytics definition of analytics a decade later, he's interested in that, but not to the exclusion of having a robust pro scouting department and continuing to think about what's the value of scouts in this new age? What's the value of the data? And whatever, if he has this job in another 5 years, wherever the game is at, he's going to make sure to be on top of that. So it's the fact that he's always has that curiosity, I think, that's really helped.
Throughout his time with the Yankees, certainly been through a number of ups and downs. What do you think's been the biggest challenge of the Cashman tenure to this point? If you had to kind of pick out a moment there.
Yeah. I'd say the 2003, 4, 5 year is when George Steinbrenner really had a shot in Tampa and was making moves. For example, Cashman has a deal with Vladimir Guerrero, a free agent, as a free agent, and George Steinbrenner says, "Nope, we just signed Sheffield and Tampa." What? Sheffield at least performed for the
Yeah.
Yankees, although Guerrero would have been even better. But there was, hey, I just signed Miguel Cairo, or I'm close to signing Miguel Cairo to play second base. Now we just did Tony Womack. Just so many of these. And then maybe 6 months later, hey, Womack stinks, Cashman. How are you going to answer for this? And it's just crazy.
Yeah.
And so that was a very challenging time. I would say increasingly over the past couple of years, as the Yankees have felt relatively successful internally by being perennially in contention and being told by fans and some media that they're horrible has been a challenge for Cashman. To He's got that ambition to want to get back to the World Series just as much as any fan does, but he also thinks they're doing a pretty good job. Actually, he thinks they're pretty effing good, as he said last winter at the GM meeting. So there's some complicated feelings there about what's gone on over the past few years too. Is probably a more recent challenge.
Just the amount of players and stars that have come through the Yankees during his time there. I mean, obviously the Jeter A-Rod dynamic is one that sticks out to me. Do you think that was the toughest pair of players he's had to deal with during his time as GM?
Probably so. You could probably find more difficult players who are less important,
Yeah.
like Raul Mondesi left after a game when he got benched and those kinds of things. It's not like Jeter and A-Rod were the most difficult guys, but because they were such massive, iconic stars who had this frenemy relationship, which could divide the clubhouse and make the clubhouse uncomfortable, was definitely Cashman's biggest clubhouse management challenge, I would say, because Jeter is such an important player to the franchise. A-Rod, when Cashman trades for A-Rod, is arguably the best player in baseball, arguably even the best player of his era, and is struggling to fit in. And Cashman's trying to get Jeter to welcome him, and there's all this complicated dynamic. And it's not like A-Rod was easy either when he's getting suspended for PEDs and suing the Yankees. And I mean, Jesus, so much with these guys. It's like
Yeah.
a lot for a GM to try to manage and a lot for managers to try to manage, whether it's Joe Torre, Joe Girardi. So yeah, I would say those two were the biggest player challenge because of their dynamic and because of the egos that come with being that successful.
You mentioned about him being kind of ideologically fluid when it comes to his philosophy. How do you think he's evolved from when he started as a GM to the way he acts as a GM right now?
I think he's always been pretty confident, but I think that the first word that comes to mind when you ask that, Jared, is confidence, and that he steps into the job thinking, okay, I think I can handle this. I think I got this. To he knows he's good. He knows he's hired good people, and he knows that the Yankees have had success. And that's probably like he's when he made, not that he wasn't confident, he makes the David Wells for Roger Clemens trade prior to the 99 season. And one thing he told me was, that was an earthquake. I would see myself doing that now, but that was a big leap then. And I think that tells you that he thinks he's more comfortable in his own skin now. I mean, he did it then, so he was still confident, but he was sort of comparing himself then to now. In terms of how he acts as a GM, I think it's really more of what we talked about before of reacting to and trying to innovate and stay ahead of the trends in the game. So he's not different. It's just that the game is different and trying to figure out what the best way to run a team in today's game is, whether it's 98, 04, 14, 24, just so he's different because the game's different.
And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, having covered the Yankees for so long and been around Cashman and the team. When you talk about that confidence, it seems like that's becoming a little bit more outwardly facing too. Whether you look at, how he handled that press conference last year, where you had alluded to earlier, where he really seemed to share his thoughts a little bit more openly than I think we've seen in the past. But maybe that's just how I've interpreted it. Do you interpret it the same way, or when you look at him from how he's dealing with the press and things like that?
I think every once in a while over the years, he's allowed himself to go a little bit more visceral, like telling A-Rod to shut the F up. He didn't intend to do that, but it did come out of his mouth in talking to a reporter. He's had his moments. This one didn't make it into the book, but since you're asking me, it reminded me. You remember when the Yankees signed Rafael Soriano and team
Yeah.
president Randy Levine kind of did that deal, and Cashman says at the press conference introducing Soriano, I didn't do this deal. So he's always kind of had that side. I think what we saw at the GM meetings last year when he was profane and defensive was that he was he was showcasing a side of his leadership of defending his guys.
Mhm.
Michael Fishman is his assistant GM and kind of analytics guy, for lack of a better term, and others in his organization um, have been dragged on for too long in the media, in his view, and on Twitter and the fans, and whatever. So he's going to stand up there and say, these guys are pretty effing good. And I can tell you, I was there and I was interacting at the GM meetings after that event with people in his front office, and they really appreciated it. Like the boss has got our back. I think that's what he was doing there, really more so, and also just getting some stuff off his chest. If you were around Cashman, you cover him, you knew that he'd been feeling those things for quite a while. The year before, they get swept by the Astros in the ALCS. Everyone says that the Yankees are broken. He's like, we were in the Final Four. Jeez, yeah, we got swept. Yeah, we're not championship caliber right now, but we were in the ALCS. Would you stop acting like we finished in last place? And I think that's been bubbling up in him for a while, and he allowed that to come out, but strategically, because I think he was helping morale in his own front office by
Yeah.
doing that.
Summer is here, and if you want to be champion of the grill, make sure you're serving the best hot dogs around. I'm talking about Martin Roastals. Our friends in New Britain have been making their small batch gourmet hot dogs for 4 generations using Martin's original recipes from 1928. So if you want to dominate your cookouts, just like the Huskies dominated the tournament, be sure to grab some Roastal dogs at your local grocery store or pay a visit to their retail store on Grove Street in New Britain. As always, go support a Yukon fan-owned business. And now, back to the episode. One thing that, and I mentioned it earlier in terms of the cycling of managers under George Steinbrenner, especially in the earlier days before Brian Cashman took over. How do you think Brian Cashman views the role of the manager? Because he's given some guys some pretty long leashes during his time as GM.
He views the manager as a culture guy, in that it's oversimplifying it by saying good cop, bad cop with Aaron Boone,
Mhm.
because Aaron Boone can be that bad cop behind closed doors more than we see at the press conferences.
Yeah.
But Cashman wants to be able to be really tough and blunt with players, and he does not see it as part of his job for players to like him personally.
Yeah.
He's not building a clubhouse culture of warmth. Aaron Boone is. building a clubhouse culture that can include disparate personalities and make people feel supported enough to perform. That's how he sees that job, like how Cashman sees that job. And he also has a bit of, because he's been doing this for so long, he has a bit of an old school tendency where he thinks the manager's job is to make the lineups, decide what happens in the games, all the things that, I mean, the idea that GMs make lineups is generally overstated across the sport right now.
Mhm.
It doesn't happen that often. But it certainly doesn't happen with the Yankees because he sees the manager's description as I hire you to run the thing between the lines. And yeah, we're going to give you information and input, but it's your job to run that game. And if you don't do it well, I'll get someone who can. He believes that Aaron Boone does that well. He believes that Joe Girardi did that well. So that's a big part of what he sees too. So it's in summary, the two pieces, the culture and the actual in-game management.
When I started reading this book, things were all good in Yankee land. They were
Yeah.
what, first team to 50 wins. Everything seemed like they were redeeming themselves from how things ended last year, and now things have kind of gone awry a bit over the past month and change. How do you feel Brian Cashman is going to attack the rest of the season here, based on what you've known of him in the past?
Yeah, it's funny how that works. I was lucky that the book came out when they were winning because people were more interested in reading about him right now. And that's just how the ups and downs of this sport go,
Yeah.
obviously. They could be really good in 2 weeks or really bad in 2 weeks. We have no idea. But to your question, uh, I think he's going to be aggressive in his characteristically measured way. They do have Juan Soto for 1 year. Whether they sign him is irrelevant to the trade. At the moment, they have him for 1 year. That's pretty all-in move, and they have a really good team. Although obviously some real serious and real holes have emerged over the past few weeks, not to deny that, but they know they have one of the better teams in the American League. They have a shot this year. So I think he will certainly be aggressive in trying to bolster that team at the trade deadline, but he's never going to do what he considers sacrificing the future in the name of going all in a season. Sometimes to fans' frustration, sometimes maybe he should. He wouldn't trade Anthony Volpe for Luis Castillo a couple of years ago, and he got Frankie Montas instead. Would you revisit that now? Maybe. Uh, so, but that's how he behaves, and that's how he'll continue to behave. He went all in by trading for Soto, but he wouldn't trade Spencer Jones for Dylan Cease or Corbin Burns. And internally, his people, his employees appreciate that he threads that needle. It's never screw the future. We're
Yeah.
all in now. Forget what happens later. And I think he'll continue to act in that way, but knowing that this is a year where they have to do their best to try to win. So there's the threading of a needle that he'll continue to do.
Yeah. You think the Yankees can turn this thing back to looking like more like the team they were in the first half of the season?
I do because they looked like that.
Yeah.
Baseball is so mysterious. It's so hard to draw any conclusions from what we see and what that means for what we'll see going forward, even in the near future. I don't know why Rodon and Luis Gil were so good, and I don't know why them were so bad, and neither does anybody. So I know they have a good pitching coach and a good pitching program to try to help turn these guys around, but a part of this is just the mystery of performance, of athletic performance. But the talent is there. The problems are also there. I think that they have real concerns with their bullpen that they had better address at the deadline. I think they have real concerns with their infield production that they'd better address at the deadline. I'm not worried about Garrett Cole. I think he's working his way back to being Garrett Cole. And I think that they'd better get a little bit better, as I said, over the next couple of weeks. But yes, I think they'll. How about that for dodging your question? At least I'm admitting that for someone who watches baseball every day, I don't have all the answers and nobody does.
No, no,
But look at if you followed the Orioles, if you're an Orioles fan right now, you're going, "Oh my God, we stink right now. What happened?" And then the Yankees beat us 2 out of 3, and they almost swept us. So there's a lot of different perspectives on this thing, that a lot of different lenses to look at it from.
yeah. I want to just ask quickly, given the amount of guys that Brian Cashman has worked with, in the personalities, Jeter, A-Rod, you go down the list. What's his relationship like with Aaron Judge? I know the negotiations you write about in the book, but
Yep.
how's that relationship now, and how has it evolved since he started?
Yeah, the negotiations are difficult, and like I said, Cashman doesn't see it as his job to make friends in the clubhouse. It's just not his role professionally. So announcing the offer that the Yankees gave the Judge really bothered Judge. And Cashman's like, okay, it bothers Judge. That's how he looks at it. So that's something that happened between them that will always be in Judge's memory, I'm sure. I don't think they always agree on the best way forward for analytics and implementation and things like that. But I know that Cashman appreciates Judge's leadership in the clubhouse because it's more inclusive than what he struggled with Jeter. Whereas Jeter wouldn't include A-Rod, Judge was like, "You're getting Stanton? Awesome. What can we do to make him feel welcome? You're getting Soto? Awesome. Same thing." And that makes it easier on Cashman because he doesn't have to beg Judge to be a leader to everybody, to be nice to people. And sometimes he did with Jeter. So I don't think the two of them are like going out for drinks just for the heck of it. But Cashman knows what he has in a leader. Judge knows that he has a GM who's good and accomplished and is giving him a contending team to play on every year. So I think it's professionally respectful.
Yeah.
In that regard.
Given what you do for SNY, I've got to at least ask for the few Mets fans I have that listen.
Sure.
Since I asked you about the Yankees, give us your thoughts on the Mets the rest of the way here.
I think they've been white hot. I think that there's real talent on that team. They'll probably come down to earth a little bit, but they have a real opportunity in a National League wild card race. It's bunched up to have a special run, whether they're a flawed team or not. They have real legit star hitters on the offensive side. The rotation, if this were a year that they expected to contend, you'd maybe like to have a little more in the rotation. Kodai Senga coming back is a question mark that could end up being a huge positive. I definitely know that they're looking for bullpen help, and that will be a significant thing when they do it. There's no reason to think that they can't secure a wild card spot this year, as well as any other of these National League teams that are vying for it. So I think it's become a better year than expected. Although, as I just said with the Yankees, am I shocked if they come out of the gate slow and out of the break and all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, they're not so good? No, because baseball's weird and anything can happen. But they have a chance this year, which is more than a lot of people expected.
For sure. I'll wrap with this one. I'm sure there had to be some Brian Cashman and Yankee stories that got left on the cutting room floor from the book that you couldn't include. What's your favorite, story maybe that didn't make it into the book?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, the one I just told about Soriano
Yeah.
was one of those little moments that pop up all the time. Let's see, one that didn't make it. I tried to put everything in there that was good and that was on the record. Jared, I honestly think working so long and hard on this book that I got just about everything in there that I felt was essential to getting in there. That's
All
my
right,
honest answer.
then I'll phrase it differently. What's the favorite story of yours that made it in the book?
There's a little one. It's not by any stretch the most important story or even an important story, but I get the biggest kick out of Brian Cashman is an intern working in the security desk in the 80s. And George Steinbrenner, the Yankees are losing. George Steinbrenner, to punish the Yankees, says to the players, or says something like, "You guys are going to bleep the bet on me. I'm going to bleep and bleep your families." And he moved the family tickets to the upper deck. And Tommy John's wife is mad at him because of this, because she's sitting in the nosebleeds. So right before a game, Tommy John gets on the elevator up to the suites, which has fans on it, and his uniform and his spikes to go kick George Steinbrenner's ass because George Steinbrenner angered his wife. And I don't know how he didn't punch him or anything, but Cashman's like in the elevator with him, like, "Oh my God, that's Tommy John, and here's fans, and what's gonna happen?" I just get a chuckle out of that story.
Yeah, no, it's when you get the vision in your head of him in the full uniform and everything going up in the elevator.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Andy, I really appreciate the time. I definitely recommend everyone check out the book, The Yankee Way, and follow Andy's coverage the rest of the baseball season and beyond. So, Andy, thanks so much for coming on.
All right, Jared, thanks for this. I appreciate it.